Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Carla Fry, and I'm going to talk with you today about student engagement in the distance learning setting. Well, some of our topics that we're going to discuss today is a little bit of a walk through the journey that is distance learning, some of the challenges and opportunities that we as educators face in the distance learning setting, some student and faculty perspectives, a bit about adopting a theoretical framework that we think would make some sense for distance learning, and then standardization, instructional design, and what the role is of academic freedom in all of this journey. Now, just a little bit of a walk down memory lane, if you will, for distance learning. If you look to the 1840s, this is really where it all began. So in England, they started using mail courses for shorthand, for learning shorthand. And many of these programs were geared towards women who may stay at home, but very quickly this progression took place where society was developed to encourage education from home. Fast forward to the 1920s, Penn State got into the game using broadcast courses via radio network. So they would offer coursework that people could learn, again, from the comfort of their own home, but instead of by mail using the radio. In the 1970s, cassette tapes, the use of tapes for certified public accounting and for several other types of professions, we would see that those tape recordings could be sent out. People could learn, turn their assignments in, again, send things back. So correspondence learning was taking different shape, moving from that of the snail mail into radio networks and then into cassettes. Then in 2000, the Online Learning Consortium began to really look carefully at what could be done. If you think back to when you first gained access to the internet, I would have to say that was probably around the time that I started to use the internet myself. But at that time, some of the colleges and universities in the United States and around the world began to get in the game of distance learning using the internet. And as early as 2002, some nursing programs, complete programs like RN to BSN, sprung up. So if you now take the leap from 2000 to 2020, there are literally thousands of programs out there offering distance learning from every subject that you can think of. And so the competition is fierce. The science has gotten, really pretty proficient and solid. And there are many who would have it no other way but to learn online. That being said, there are still those naysayers that say, online education is in some way inferior. And I don't know that I believe that to be true. It is indeed different, but I don't think that it is in any way inferior when it is done well. So that's just a little bit of a journey through the history of distance learning. Another common misconception is the course structure and layout may be totally the responsibility of the faculty member, and that the layout and structure is the prerogative of the instructor. So this gets a little bit into the academic freedom, discussion. And with respect to academic freedom, while you can teach a course and teach to the objectives any way you choose, as a faculty member at any college or university, the objectives that are there before you and the methods of assessment, those that are typically already in place on a syllabus, should certainly be adhered to regardless of the format. Now, from the student perspective, there are also some misconceptions out there. Some students will think, mistakenly so, that online classes are easier. And this is just not the case. We need to make sure as instructors that we do our best to teach the class just the same as we would, to the extent possible, online or face-to-face. Now, of course, there are going to be some subtle differences, but the material, whatever material is delivered in the classroom, should be delivered in the online classroom as well. Some people think, the instructor won't bother me, or I won't be able to reach my instructor. In other words, they're just an absentee instructor because this is an online course. We need to do everything we can to make sure that there's a touchstone in place. Make sure students can reach you very readily, whether via email or phone. Set office hours that are virtual. And when those office hours are set, send out reminders that you're going to be online, logged in at a certain time, ready to answer any questions that they may have. And then just generally speaking, post often in the course so that the students will really know that you are indeed present, that you are taking a look at their work on a daily basis or on a, however often the course meets. The quality of the course should be just as rigorous as it would be if you were teaching in the classroom face-to-face. And with respect to cheating, we need to really make sure that we're looking at all technology that we have at our fingertips to prevent this from happening. Academic integrity is a challenge regardless of where we are, but in the online setting, it can be a huge challenge. So take a look at some lockdown browser options. I know that we are using Proctorio in our Nursing and Health Sciences division, and that's working out well for us. But we do need to make very sure that students are not tempted to cheat when it comes to exams online. Some challenges and opportunities in distance learning, they certainly do exist. And I know that we've experienced a lot of those as we had to transition rather abruptly from face-to-face to distance learning when COVID struck the nation. So what do you think? What do these unique challenges really look like? We've got social isolation, technology, engagement, several different things here to talk about. The first, social isolation. I think it really depends largely on the personality. And we do have students who certainly have an affinity for face-to-face communication and face-to-face classes. But if we know that about them, if we've taken the time to really get to know our students and we set up venues in the distance learning setting, whether that's discussions or the use of Flipgrid, little short videos, things like that, having synchronous sessions, opportunities for students to just gather and converse with one another in some of the little work group settings. There are all kinds of things that we can do to hopefully a little bit at least help with that social isolation piece. Technology, we've talked a little bit about. It needs to be easy. It needs to be accessible to everyone. It really shouldn't be too many bells and whistles in place. It needs to be really something that's a plug and play, if you will. Learning styles, everybody has different learning styles. When we meet with these challenges in the classroom face to face, I'd like to think that that we address them, but we can't always. Sometimes, regardless of what a person's learning style is, they're still getting that straight up lecture from a PowerPoint. So how is it different in the online setting? Well, you can create some differential assignments, and if you want to take the time to do so, you can offer the same content in many different formats. You can offer a video, you could do a traditional lecture, you could do a handout, you could do an article. So there are many ways to address any given topic, and we should really be doing that anyway. Again, we have different learning styles, whether it's in the face-to-face classroom or in the distance learning setting. Addressing high DFWs, some subjects are more difficult than others, more technical, and when that is the case, they're going to need more of a touchstone. They're probably going to need some live lecture, at least the opportunity to have question and answer sessions. And so I encourage you, if the subject matter is very difficult, if one week is maybe more difficult than the next, set up Q&A sessions where you're going to be logged in live and the students can pose their questions, or set up polling, make sure that there's some way that they can get their questions answered, and make sure that you reach out to those students who you can see from your dashboard are not participating, because obviously if they're not participating, there's something that is going on. The sooner you can identify what the issue is, the more likely you are to be able to retain that student. And certainly we all know that retention is extremely important. Now, here are some of the unique opportunities that I feel we have in the distance learning setting. For one, improved access. We don't all live in Key West proper or wherever you happen to find yourself, and we don't always want to travel. And especially now, we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic, and who knows how long this is going to continue. If I can access education from my own living room, that to me is a huge win. Flexibility with course load. When it comes to our instructors and setting up course load, we can really look at this as an opportunity to change the way that our model looks. Right now, our model is that there's 15 hours in the spring and fall and 6 hours in the summer. But does it really have to be that way if I can teach from the comfort of my own home? So I think we have a chance to look at things a little bit differently with respect to course load. A broader teaching pool, really, we're here in Florida, and as long as your instructor, your subject matter expert lives someplace in Florida, there's no reason that we can't hire adjuncts who don't live in Monroe County. And that, to me, again, is a win. We have the opportunity to find people who, may have been maybe subject matter experts that we never could have accessed otherwise. They're not going to be moving here. So they could teach our students and truly bring another perspective to the classroom. Convenience, of course, and a comfortable learning environment. I don't have to be all dressed up. I can be sitting in my pajamas in the comfort of my own home, and I can be learning. And sometimes being uncomfortable is a huge barrier to learning. So if you've ever sat in a classroom that's freezing cold or too hot or too noisy, you know all too well what I'm talking about. And then anonymity, and I say ish. Students, what I've found over the years teaching online is that it's interesting when you set up discussion boards versus when you're in a classroom face-to-face. I sometimes feel that there's power, that there's a bit of a power to be had from sitting behind a keyboard where nobody is looking at you necessarily face-to-face. Now, that doesn't mean that that's a license for them to be rude, but even though their name may be attached to a post, it seems that there is some freedom in being able to, to sit from the comfort of their own home and to write whatever it is that they're writing about a little more freely and without feeling like their classmates may be looking at them, kind of cross-eyed, if you will. And then generational research. This is both a challenge and an opportunity. We'll talk about that a little bit further down the road here. So how do we align our principles? We need to look at effective teaching, student expectations, faculty perceptions, and get to the point where we really feel like we have an end product that is valuable to all. So a few years back, I conducted some research, doing some focus group research with a colleague of mine, looking to see what did our students really want. And the students that we were talking with were taking programming that was strictly online. So we were asking them, well, if you could have whatever you wanted in a perfect world, what would you be looking for in the distance learning setting? Pretty much unanimously, they all said that they wanted ease of use. They wanted an adaptable platform so that they could use their smartphones, not just their computers. They didn't want to have any external hardware, any extras, no plugins, just Wi-Fi and a device. That was it. And once they could log in, they were good to go. They did want social opportunities, and we talked a little bit about that already. And then they wanted what they kind of described as tradition meets innovation. In other words, the content might be dull, but the presentation and the style should be somewhat unique or intriguing. Now, we can only do so much. Sometimes material is kind of dry. But what I try to do, I'm not necessarily an online entertainer, an edutainer, as the case may be, but I do try to offer a bunch of different ways to get at the same material, and I find that that can be really, really helpful for our students. They ask for flexibility, and that should be no surprise. Our students often want flexibility with due dates and things like that. So pretty much the same things that we afford our face-to-face students, they were asking for in the online setting. And then authenticity. And authenticity, comes through loud and clear when you're standing in front of somebody and you have the ability of not just your voice, but your facial expressions and your body language and all of that stuff. And so, how do you really seem authentic in the distance learning setting when they're not, standing there or sitting there looking at you? Well, the thing is that you really just tell your story. And if you're like me and you've spent your life practicing as a nurse, those stories that you tell, case studies that can be turned into a story of caring for a patient and your experiences that you've had, some of them positive, some of them maybe not so positive. Telling stories can really lend itself well to authenticity. And then just being a human being. You're not just a talking head on a computer screen. You want to be yourself. It's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to laugh. You do have to keep in mind sometimes that, if you make jokes, if you're one to tell jokes or to try to be funny, that especially that kind of sarcastic humor can be a little bit lost when they're not looking at you and seeing you, again, your facial expressions. But just being your authentic self is a big deal. Taking a pragmatic approach to learning, making sure that if you're working with adult learners, adult working professionals, that you're not putting in all of these extra bells and whistles, that you're really just getting to the heart of the content because that's what they're after. And then having the ability to have a voice, so even though the student may be at a distance, for all we know, they could be in another country learning, regardless of where they are and what the time and place is, that they do have a voice and a say, and that they can reach you when they need to do so. Now for a little bit of discussion on theoretical framework in the distance learning setting. And you may say, well, why would we need such a thing? That sounds really dry and boring. Well, Chickering and Gamson back in the 80s came up with a framework for baccalaureate education. And what they were really getting at was, how do we engage our learners? So they wrote a great article and they talked about students who just wanted A's and how did they really go about engaging them? And then they took it step by step. And these were the 7 ways that they felt would really help with student engagement. And keep in mind, this was not distance learning, this was face-to-face baccalaureate education. So student-faculty contact, cooperation among students, active learning, prompt feedback that is constructive, time on task. We'll talk about all these in some more detail, keeping high expectations, and then respecting diversity of talent and ways of learning. So let's take each of these a little bit step by step in what I would call an adaptation using Chickering and Gamson as a theoretical framework for us for distance learning. Now that first principle, student-faculty contact. A couple of things that really make a difference in distance learning, and I call it SSDD. It's the same stuff but a different delivery. When it comes to face-to-face learning, your student may not get the syllabus until the day they show up, and that might be okay with them because they know that you're going to go over it in great detail. But sometimes there's a lot of apprehension out there when a student is not in the same social network, if you will, as other students. In other words, they don't live even maybe in the same city or town. So they're all on their own out there trying to figure out what's going to happen in this course. So setting up a preview week where the student can access the content ahead of time. They can see the syllabus, they can see what the requirements are going to be. Maybe they can see all of the discussions or maybe just the first one, but letting them have a preview of what the course is going to look like that they're taking can be extremely valuable in helping to calm nerves and prevent students from dropping courses. Now this requires that we have things set up a little bit ahead of time. And I'm with you, and I know that I've had many evenings where I'm preparing the course for the next day. So it does require that you have a little bit more planning there and have it ready, but it can really help a lot to prevent some of those drops that we see in week 1. Having a personal greeting, it's great if you can do it as a video. You don't have to, but that's a wonderful way to go so they can see and hear you. Posting office hours, setting up times that you're going to have absolute availability that is undistracted time. And then no talking head. You guys aren't seeing my face. I guess you already know who I am. But even if you didn't, posting a profile pic is probably enough. You really don't need to lecture with them just looking at you the entire time. Use your slides. Use any other visuals. Use a whiteboard. I like to use a whiteboard and draw on it via my computer. And I know that Big Blue Button and a few other technologies that we have out there will work for that. Whatever you can do to prevent that just talking head feeling of being engaged. And then if you're doing a larger class, if you have a lot of students, you can embed an advisor. It's great to use a librarian or a teaching assistant in there because they want a touchstone, but it doesn't necessarily have to be you. They just need to know that they can reach somebody. And so many times the questions that they're going to have are not even going to be anything related to the subject matter, but more they're probably related to just the ins and outs of the course or to finding some resource that they need. So a little bit more on authenticity. Use a natural communication style. It's okay to be funny. Obviously, you want to be careful of context, but you want to be a real person, even though they can't necessarily see you. Cooperation among students. Work on ways to involve students in the content. You can use student-found content. You're not going to use that as your primary modality for teaching a subject, but you can have them find articles or content that is related to the subject that you're teaching, and that can be a lot of fun. You want to vet that material, of course. Do be aware of ADA issues, and also be aware of copyright issues when it comes to cooperation and what they're going to post. But there's no reason that they can't go out there and find content that can help to add to the depth and breadth of the conversation. Principle number 3, active learning. Make sure they can find the content first and foremost, and then shorten up your lectures. You know, we really cannot have, in the distance learning setting, hours and hours and hours worth of dry content just delivered by PowerPoint that the student has to sit and watch or listen. You're going to lose them. You know, so try to shorten up the lectures into smaller bites. I try now to do 15 or 20-minute lectures and post several instead of posting one long lecture. So I may try to break up the content into, you know, what seems like kind of logical bites, if you will. And then do hold a couple of synchronous sessions every term. If it's an 8-week term, I typically hold at least 2 synchronous sessions, one at the beginning and one at the end. If it's a little bit more difficult subject matter, I may offer 3. And then in a 16-week, at least 3 or 4 would be great. Encourage your students to participate. Use back channels, use polling, use discussion boards, you know, use badging where they can earn awards when they reach certain milestones. All of those things are going to encourage active learning. The use of mini lectures can be really great. And again, sometimes just a 5-minute lecture to emphasize a certain point. If you're trying to teach maybe how to do some mathematical equation, something like that, teach just that one thing in a little mini lecture, record that and upload it. And that can be really useful. And students will oftentimes listen to that little mini lecture over and over again. But one of the things that I find that's really useful is to definitely post exemplars. You know, so an assignment, a written assignment in particular, where I want specific things to be included, it may not be enough just to give them a rubric. They may really just want to see an example of that assignment. You know, if you're using Turnitin or some other anti-plagiarism software, you don't need to worry that they're going to, you know, take that idea and run with it. You're going to check on that. But providing that example for them can just really be a wonderful blueprint for them to make sure that they're on track for the assignment. And frankly, it cuts down on the amount of questions that you're going to have to field from the students as well. Now, do be sure that the feedback is substantive. I typically use track changes in Word, and I teach all of my students at the outset how to use track changes, to the point that sometimes I record or show them, do a quick little video that shows them specifically how to use track changes so they don't miss anything, and then provide that substantive feedback as you normally would. And then with respect to opening assignments at intervals, you know, not everybody feels like this is the way to go. Some instructors open their entire course all at once. Others will open week by week. This is totally up to you. You have the freedom to do it however you want. But if you're afraid that they're going to race through all of the content and you really need things to unfold in a certain way, then be sure to open them up bit by bit. For me, with adult learners, and primarily that's what I've worked with for many, many years, is the RN to BSN population. I don't really care how they do the assignments. Unless it's a group assignment, I open them all. And if they have to work extra or overtime one particular week, but the next week they happen to find themselves with some downtime, I am perfectly fine with them completing their assignments, you know, kind of clustered all in one sitting, if you will. But it really does depend on, you know, who your target audience is and what you're trying to achieve. So this is totally up to you. All right, on to principle number 6, high expectations. Distance learning, again, no different than the face-to-face classroom when it comes to our expectations. We should keep the bar high. We need to follow the syllabus, and we don't go easy on people just because the venue has changed. Obviously, you want to be compassionate, and people have all sorts of things going on in their lives, but encourage communication. Make sure that your students know that if they're going through something, you're not going to know unless they tell you. You know, make sure that they know how to reach you if they need you, and if something's going on that's going to impact their ability to turn in an assignment or what have you. And then definitely lead by example. If you don't stay on top of things and keep high expectations for yourself, then you really can't expect those same things out of your students. Again, this principle, high expectations, I feel would translate across any setting or any venue that we happen to be finding ourselves teaching in. And finally, principle number 7, respecting diverse talents and ways of learning. If you can, and you have the ability to do so in your particular subject matter, think about competency-based learning. With nurses, this is obviously my area of expertise, and so with nurses, especially those who are already practicing nursing, many of them may have some expertise in a particular subject matter. And I'll use critical care because that's my love, my passion, and I'm teaching a course in that now. If you've got somebody who's in your classroom who already works in the ICU, they're clearly going to have a level of competency that is completely different from a nurse who maybe works in an outpatient care or in a school setting, something like that. So there's nothing wrong with creating competency-based approaches and letting people sort of test out, if you will, of a particular assignment, if they already have a thorough understanding of that. Now, creating those alternate pathways or creating maybe assignment A, B, and C and giving them choices of which one they would do is great, as long as you make sure that you keep the point system consistent and that you don't make something so much more difficult than the other. And again, if you're giving choices between assignment A, B, and C, there's nothing at all wrong with that. And it can really generate a sense of respect. Your students know that you respect the fact that they already do have a command of that material, and you're not asking them to do it over again just for the sake of busy work. Do think about incorporating a learning style. If you're able to assess learning styles early on, even if you just ask the question, how do you learn best? Maybe you could do that in your introductory discussion board. It can really help you to understand who you have in your classroom and how best you're going to reach them and really help keep them engaged. Just a little bit more here on Principle 7, the expanded version, if you will, on varied ways of learning. Using student presentations via smartphone or Flipgrid in lieu of the traditional PowerPoint can be a lot of fun. Sometimes I have students try SlideShare, and I've had them use Wix and Weebly, which are both free sites to create little mini websites. So if they're trying to get their point across, maybe it's something to do with policy development, or they're trying to reach a certain target audience, I may have them create a website, and they can publish it just long enough to have it graded, and then they can certainly unpublish it, or they can keep it private and just send you a link and you can grade it that way. But just trying to use some different modalities, some things to get out of the box a little bit and to create some interest and to give your students another skill set. I have students that say to me, I never even knew I could create a website, and this particular site made it easy. Wix or Weebly, they're really easy to use. Same thing with Flipgrid. They can create little short videos of themselves, and it's super simple. And then they have another skill set in their wheelhouse that they can perhaps use as a translatable skill in some other aspect of their lives. Consider using a break room or an off-topic conversation forum where your students can post just things that are social in nature. They can get to know one another better that way. Do create some guardrails for that, making sure that they understand that the use of profanity or anything inappropriate wouldn't be tolerated. And you're going to have to take a look at those off-topic conversations from time to time. You don't necessarily need to engage in them, but you do need to make sure that they're staying professional. And then discussion boards, they're great, but they're a little overused in distance learning. So try to be mindful of that and come up with some other creative ways. Again, Flipgrid, which is free, is a great way to really kind of spice up your discussion boards a little bit. They can be a lot more fun and engaging that way. Don't overuse any one type of assignment regardless of the class or program. And then do be aware of copyright infringement. There's a lot out there that's readily available at our fingertips, but you can run afoul of the law if you just grab things and post them as your own. So we want to be mindful of copyright and of plagiarism and all those things. A little more on instructional design. Settle on a platform and stick to it. I know at our college we're using Canvas currently, but there are some classes and some instructors that may not be using Canvas. Now that is a source of serious confusion for students, and so even if you're not going to use Canvas all that much, if that is the adopted learning management system for the college, the very least you should do is start your course on Canvas and then direct them out to other links if they're going to use other things as they learn in your course. Provide faculty with the resources that they need. Our faculty need to be able to record videos readily. They need to have all of the technology at their fingertips to create the cutting edge types of things that we're asking of them. A cohesive system-wide strategy is of extreme value. Right now we're grappling with some of these things. Are we going to use the big blue button, or are we going to use GoToMeeting, or are we recording in PowerPoint and uploading to YouTube? We really should think about that and develop some cohesive strategy, again, for the sake of the students, so that they can know what to expect, but also so that we can put some time and talent around that. Maybe we need to purchase some specialized equipment, whatever it happens to be. Maybe we need a studio, a little small recording studio, or even something as simple as headsets. But whatever it is, it should be adopted on a system-wide scale so that we can make sure that everyone is on the same page and we're all learning together. Hiring an expert to assist with distance learning and online learning culture is a great idea. I would highly recommend that we put somebody at the helm for distance learning that has that area of expertise in their wheelhouse, and that can help to design, not just to design the courses, maybe sit with the instructors and help them with their design, but that can really make sure that the mission and vision is aligned well with what we're trying to accomplish. So thinking about the college's mission and thinking about what distance learning does for our college, what does it do for our bottom line? How does it serve our students? How do our faculty feel about it? And making sure that all of the stakeholders are involved as decisions, particularly those that are really important decisions, are being made. Considering enlisting the help of an instructional designer is great, but do keep in mind that an instructional designer really does speak a different language. So if you're going to hire one, you need to make sure that that person, that ID, is a people person, because chances are at some point in time they're going to be working with faculty who are not all that tech savvy. They may be an absolute expert in their field of study, but they don't know much of anything about technology. And if you have an ID who really doesn't have a very good tolerance for that, you're not going to have a good match. So they may be able to make a beautiful course and make all kinds of cool little applications or kind of tips and tricks along the way for how to make the course interesting from a design perspective, but they don't have the subject matter expertise. And if they can't play well with others, it's not going to go well for anybody. And then ensuring oversight is in place at the institutional and programmatic levels. When we're developing, we should not be developing in a vacuum. We need to make sure we're collaborating with one another at all times. As we're building programs like the RN to BSN program, which is pretty new. I have the luxury, had the luxury of really starting it almost from scratch, so I know what's in each and every one of those courses. Now, why does that matter? Well, of course, you need to make sure you're meeting all the student learning outcomes, the programmatic outcomes, but also, again, that you're not overutilizing any one assignment. So that oversight has to be done, and it's ideal if it can be done in the form of a crosswalk, and all faculty can have input into the program and the content. When it comes to accrediting bodies have become very, very savvy with distance learning. In days of old, they really didn't know too much about it, and they kind of shied away from it. But since that time, SACSEOC, ACEN for nursing, and many, many other accrediting bodies have taken the time and they have gone to class and they have participated in things like the OLC scorecard, which is the Online Learning Consortium scorecard. And that's nearly the equivalent. It's very similar to Quality Matters, which is one of the things that we're using, here at our college. But suffice it to say, our accrediting bodies, those who are coming to conduct site visits, they know what to look for at the course level, at the programmatic level, and at the institution level. So we want to make very sure that if we're offering distance learning, that we can really speak to the fact that our distance learners are indeed a part of the college, that they feel like they're a part of the college, they feel engaged, they feel like they can reach us, they feel like the resources that we have, whether those resources have to do with the library, physical resources, or distance learning resources, whatever they are, that they're all at their fingertips, so to speak. So now that our accrediting bodies have become much more savvy, it's important that we can walk the walk. So you want to look carefully at what Quality Matters has to say about how the course should be, and bear in mind that it's really got almost nothing to do with the content. It has everything to do with the availability of resources and accessibility and ease of use. And so we want to pay particular attention to all of those things, again, in addition to the subject. Instructional design with respect to generations. I'll tell you just a quick story here, and that is that I redesigned a course many years ago now on informatics, so nursing informatics. And it was a really dull course. It was super boring, and I really didn't like it, but the content was good, so I kept most of the content, but I just redesigned the course and some of the assignments to create some gamification, some little kind of fun things that I thought that they could do, some bells and whistles, if you will. Now, when I did this, I ran the legacy version, which was the original version of the course in one section, and I ran the new version in the other section. And what I found was that the drop rate for the newly designed course was nearly 50%. And I gotta say, I was totally stunned. I was astonished. I lost a couple of students in one course section, and I lost 10 students in the other section, and I couldn't figure out what that was all about. So I called them. I didn't just email them. I didn't just wait for somebody to tell me. I picked up the phone and I called each and every one of those students, and I said, what gives? Why'd you drop this course? It's really not that difficult. What was the issue? And what they said was, we don't want all that stuff. We don't want all that fancy stuff in our course. We just need to learn. Just give us the material and tell us what we need to know, and then, give us our assignments, and that's it. That's all we really want. Well, lesson learned, because the group of students that I was teaching at the time, all practicing nurses, many of them at least in their 40s, 50s, out of school for 10, 20 years, coming back to get their bachelor's degree in nursing, and they wanted nothing to do with bells and whistles. They didn't want to play games, they just wanted the content. So you need to bear in mind who your audience is, and if you decide to work with an instructional designer, that's one of the things that you need to make sure you clue them into early on as well before you begin the build. Now, the role of academic freedom is important to discuss. I really identify as a faculty member. I've worked in admin and as a faculty for many, many years, but teaching is my love, and so the classroom is my place of comfort. When it comes to academic freedom, I want the ability myself to be able to teach in any way that I see fit, but that does not mean that I can take the objectives and change them, and that does not mean that I can amend the textbook, right? I can throw the textbook out and say, I'm not going to use this anymore. It's the selected textbook, and it's in place for probably a period of 3 years, so I have to use it. I need to give timely feedback. I don't have the academic freedom just to not provide grades until the very end of the course and to keep those grades kind of a secret, if you will. I need to hold office hours as I'm expected to do so, and I really need to make sure I adhere to response times and make sure that the student feels that I'm accessible and available. When it comes to methods of assessment, those methods of assessment, if we're going to change them, we need to change those, as faculty are coming together in assembly. So if you've got a program with 5, 6 faculty members like we have, before we start changing assessment methodology, we talk about that. And then we make sure that we're all in agreement, and then, then we could go from there. So yes, there are things that you can do differently with academic freedom. You can couch them in academic freedom, but you do have to adhere to the syllabus, and you need to adhere to whatever the college's expectations are of you as an academician. All right, everybody, that's the conclusion. I would love very much to hear from you. So if you have questions, or if you want to talk a little bit further about distance learning and student engagement, please feel free to reach out to me. I can be reached at carla.fry@cfk.edu. That's carla.fry@cfk.edu. Or you're welcome to give me a call, and my phone number is 305-809-3222. Thanks very much. I hope you've learned something today, and I will see you soon. Take care.